Shalom. I'm Pinkas, Cohen Pinkas. I was born in Birmingham, Britain, and just over a year ago I relocated to Israel, and I'd like to introduce you to Rabbi Sheikh Gidon.
My name is Rabbi Sheikh Gidon. I was born in Brooklyn, New York. 4 years ago I relocated to Israel, and today in this video we are going to go through my family's history and my connection to King JAJA. We're going to go over the lineage and the legacy. We're also going to go through the history of the Igbo people and through the agreements of oppression. These three things will show the connection of the Igbo people to the land of Israel and my history of my family throughout the generations.
So I spent the last 19 years working in trust law in Birmingham, the UK. And a trust is simply a set of legal obligations that protects an asset, passing it from one generation to the next so that it remains in the bloodline without losses, and the family maintains control of the asset.
This history, this story, for some people, it's something historical to be studied, but for me, this is personal. This is my family. This is my heritage. This is what's left, my legacy, to be carried on now into the future. So let's begin. My father, his name is Robert. And then you have my grandfather, and he's pictured above here. I called him Grandpa, Papa. He died when I was also very young. And then we get to my great-grandfather, King JAJA. What I know of King JAJA personally is very little, bits and pieces, because his history is fragmented. So, about the stuff that happened in the continent of Africa, exactly, I'm not sure. But as for what is passed down through the family and what we have come and to learn, to come into, I'll share with you here. So I grew up in Brooklyn, and this story, we're going to cover a large section of time in a very short period of time. So I'm only going to hit the major bumps in the road, but there were a lot of smaller steps. But I have to give you an overview in the picture so that you can make the connections and see the truth as it's explained, as I bring it out. And now we come to King JAJA, from the Bani people, or the Bani clan, as we say back in America. King JAJA was killed in St. Vincent. He was actually killed en route on his way back to Opobo. It was advised that we go to America, into the big city, because he didn't trust the way the situation was unfolding in the islands of St. Vincent and with his coming back to Africa. So we went there. After he was killed, his death was published in the New York Times. The information had gotten out that we had been in New York. New York City is unlike any city in the world. A person can hide in plain sight, right in the public, and nobody not know because of the dense population of people. You can live and never meet your next door neighbor, and he's just 200 meters down the street, and you've never seen each other. So we stayed in New York. The family felt pretty safe there. At the time when JAJA was leaving to go back to Opobo, the British controlled the seas. So he was very unsure about whether or not they would allow him safe passage. And with him being assassinated, well, we know that they didn't.
To understand what happened, we have to understand a little history, sovereign law, the history of the nations, and who the enemies are from the beginning.
The law of kingdoms, or sovereign law, it works in two ways. To conquer a nation, you must either utterly defeat that nation, drive out and scatter its people, taking some as slaves, and bring the king into captivity. That's the first way. It is the most barbaric of ways to conquer a nation or to subdue a people. The second way, however, is a way common amongst national families, in which a small battle may ensue, or an agreement is made, and one nation keeps its land and its ruler, but the ruler becomes subject to the greater nation and the greater rulership. You'll see what I mean by this next clip.
The mine wins, you can keep your throne, but Thessaly falls under my command to fight with me whenever I call.
I'm going to begin with the Concordat of 1801. A Concordat is an agreement between the Vatican and a state or country. The 1801 Concordat between France, Britain, and Vatican had certain results, which you're going to hear about throughout this presentation. A Concordat is a sovereign document issued between the Vatican and the nation or country, reorganizing that nation under the Vatican's powers. The Vatican's powers are sovereignty, law, executive, legislature, judiciary, elections, college of cardinals, such as churches and Christianity, and foreign relations. In the Concordat of 1801, between the Vatican, France, and Britain, power was over the seas was transferred from France to Britain, enabling Britain to control, track, and relocate and have dominion over the Igbo people and their lands in exile.
So as Pinkas just explained, this is the Vatican's move. But what was happening before 1801? Well, in 1611, it was the Vatican that mandated that the King James be the exclusive refined text throughout the world. This would be the foundation of the teachings and doctrines sanctioned by the Vatican itself. In 1619, slavery and the transatlantic slave trade began in America. Now, 1611, the King James. 1619, transatlantic slave trade. We know that slavery in England began before these dates. These dates were also, all of these times before 1611 were all mandated and being controlled by the Vatican and Spain, and Spain's involvement in the transport of slaves, which was the big business of the Portuguese. Rome. Why Rome? And why has Rome had such a deep hatred for the Israelites, the Igbo people? For that, we're going to have to go all the way back to the beginning. And we're going to have to look at some of the history books. I hold in my hand the entire unedited history of the Israelites, written by us from the time of the Exodus all the way up until 70 AD, when we were exiled, and our accurate involvement, how our nation fell.
So now that I've mentioned the Vatican, it's important to know who the Vatican is. And I'm going to be reading from the book of JAJA, chapter 10, verse 16. And it says that the children of Kittim are the Romans who dwell in the valley of Canopia by the river Tiberia. Chapter 90, verses 28 to 30 reads, King Albianus took his army against the inhabitants of Britain and Germany, the children of Elisha, son of Javan, and he prevailed over them and made them pay taxes. He then heard that Edom had revolted from under the hand of Kittim, and Latinus went to them and smote them and subdued them, and placed them under the hand of the children of Kittim. And Edom became one kingdom with the children of Kittim. So since that time, the children of Rome and the children of Esau, the Edomites, have been one people until today. During that time, we had just entered into the land of Israel and began to settle.
So now we know from these major documents who the major players are. You have Britain and Germany, you have Rome, you have Edom. Now, this time that we were just coming out in the Exodus and just coming into the land with Joshua, you'll see that it was Edom that was defeated by the British and then placed under the hand of Rome, and they began to unite and become one kingdom, and they remained one kingdom. So King Albianus was in charge first, and he had Rome under subjection. Rome will eventually overturn that with the unification of Edom later. So to understand where Edom is, we have to take a look at the geographic location given for the land of Esau. In the book of Joshua, chapter 15, verse 1, you'll see that Esau's land is located to the south of Judah. Never changed, they never lost their land. Remember what I told you about the two ways to conquer a nation. The two ways are, one, you either go in and utterly destroy the nation, its cities, its land, everything. Scattering the people, taking some of the slaves, and capturing the king. The second way, you allow the king to remain in his land. He is just under your rulership and leadership, and you're following him, and he continues to govern his people. So, Saudi Arabia is in the south. They're still on their land. You've seen the definitions and the powers of what a concordat is, the powers of the Vatican, and this gives the transfer of the seas to Britain. Britain and the Roman papacy begin tracking Igbo settlements, and this is documented by Bill Crowther in the book King JAJA of the Niger Delta. Is also tracking that the legislative branch of the Hebrews or the Igbos are in Nigeria, and that the other families and other branches of the river states, that where's the priesthood and what's the religious practice and who is where, what are they looking for. The British are taking exacting pains and taking censuses and painstaking information to gather for the Vatican to find something. Well, in detail, they were tracking the princes and the priesthood. The settlements and the regions are all categorized and cataloged with detail. The images and the bloodlines of all ruling family tribes and priests as well. The enemies of the Igbo people are France, Britain, Rome, the Saudis, and even, in part, with Christianity. The agreements that were made to continue the Roman oppression from the exile of Judah in 70 AD led all the way up to this concorded agreement. Rome overturned what King Albius set up in 43 AD. In 43 AD, it is documented by the Vatican that they had conquered Rome. The Britain's army is recorded in the Old Testament. So we have to know, why are the Britons coming after the Edomites during the time of the Exodus, and what is their big beef against us even here today? For that, we have to go a little further back so that we can proceed forward with our presentation. And we're going to look to our forefather, Isaac. Now, looking at Isaac, we're going to go back to Isaac at the...
And action.
Do you have any jabs? You know, I don't mind being happy. I just want to feel alive, you know? It feels so good to hug, to touch, to feel, to connect. A hug, it really means everything.
Feeling good with Ocean Spray supporting your immune system.
Of oath. And this is from Book of Jubilees, chapter 24, and verse 26. And he called the name of that place the Well of Oath. For there he had sworn to Abimelech and Ahuzeth, his friend, and Pekol, the prefect, the priest, or his host. And Isaac knew that day that under constraint he had sworn to them to make peace with them. So Isaac is outnumbered, and being outnumbered and forced to get into an agreement, he agrees. Isaac on that day cursed the Philistines. Right? So now this is Isaac's curse. We're going to see it play out from the past information and moving forward into future information. And said, this is Isaac's curse. Cursed be the Philistines unto the day of wrath and indignation from the midst of all nations. May Yahweh, Yah, whichever one you perceive to say, or may God, the Almighty, the greatest, make them a derision and a curse and the object of wrath and indignation in the hands of the sinners, the Gentiles, and in the hands of Kittim, Rome. So now you have Rome, who now in the future, today's time, Rome they orchestrated the Balfour Declaration with Britain, their daughter, the United States. And they have signed the Balfour Declaration to put this Israeli government into place. And the Israeli government has punished the Philistines, the Palestinians, even now to this day. Isaac then goes on to say in verse 29, and whoever escapes the sword of the enemy and the Kittim, the Romans. So whoever escapes the war, you get out from their enemies, to get out from their exiles, to get out from their governments, to come back to the customs and traditions, back to the family of Abraham. May the righteous nation, that is the righteous nation, root out in judgment from under heaven. For they shall be enemies and foes of my children throughout their generations upon the earth. So, to make this very clear, Isaac and Rebekah, they have twins. Esau, who becomes Edom, and Jacob, who becomes Israel. These two nations get made war with. And here's what happened. First, during the Exodus, King Abianus defeats Edom during that time. And he places Edom underneath Kittim. And the Romans rule over them. And they become one nation, marrying each other until the Edomites eventually rise to power. In 70 AD, Kittim, the Romans, drive us out and place us under subjection. And now, in 1801, they sign the Concordance and place us now under the British rulership. So now we have the Britain, running and ruling over the Igbo people, the Israelites, in exile after they ran them out of their land. And this is what Isaac said would happen. So if you escape from their control, then you will become the righteous people, because the only place they don't control is within the family of Abraham.
The motivation of Rome's hatred for Isaac's children, Esau and Jacob, Edom and Israel, stems from when Isaac cursed Kittim, Rome, at the Well of Oath in Tel Sheba. Britain conquers Edom and gives Edom to Rome. Eventually, Edom and Rome unite and come into the land of Israel to destroy the land. The Israelites flee into Africa and into the four corners of the world. I'm now going to go through the lineage of King JAJA and Rabbi Sheikh. Yehuda and Tamar, the daughter of Shem, had a child who was Hezron, who then had Ram, who had Aminadab, then there was Nashon, then Salama, who had Isban, otherwise known as Boaz, who had Obed, who had Jesse, who had David, who had Solomon, who had Rehoboam, under whom the kingdom split, who then had Abiah, who then had Asher, who had Jehoshaphat, who had Joram, who had Ahaziah, who had Joash, who had Amaziah, who had Shariah, who had Jotham, who had Ahaz, who had Hezekiah, who had Manasseh, who had Ammon, who had Josiah, who had Shealtiel, who had Zerubbabel, who had Hananiah, who had Shechaniah, who had Shemariah, who had Neriah, who had Eloniah, who had Pedaiah. And under Pedaiah, the kingdom of Judah was scattered by the Romans.
So, you've just heard my bloodlines from myself up to King JAJA. And you've heard from Judah down to Pedaiah. To make this next connection between King JAJA and Pedaiah, I'm going to give you a little history of what happened just before 70 AD. In 43 AD, Rome conquers Great Britain. In 70 AD, Rome, which is Edom and Kittim, they go in and conquer the land of Israel, southern portion of Judah, scattering them into Africa and into the four corners of the world. After the kingdom of Judah is scattered, from Rome, continues to pursue Israel throughout Africa through the Arabic slave trade. So from the Saudis and the rest of the Arabs in the region, they begin the Arabic slave trade pursuing the Igbo people. Rome does not relent. This continues all the way up until the transatlantic slave trade, which is run by Spain, Portugal, which also ties in to why in 1815 Rome does the same thing and returns the favor in giving Israel back into the hands of the British. And with it, they gave them certain documentational names. Now the question becomes, why Britain? Why British? What is the tie to the British? And to bring you into the tie of the British, I have to take you back to the beginning with Abraham. You see, Abraham lived in Babylon. Babylon is a big place. All the nations pretty much are gathered there. That's all the people. But the peoples are still kind of separated into sections, each one having a city. There were 5 cities in total. Now, the city right above the Euphrates is known as Ur. Ur is a certain people. And it says it's Ur of the Chaldees. So we know that Abraham lived in Ur with the Chaldeans. Who are the Chaldeans?
Euro is the money, the currency. Europe is the location, the geographical position of where they're situated, and Europeans are the peoples of Europe.
There you have it. Europe Jash is listed as Jemania and Britannia. They're the Chaldeans. Abraham leaves from Ur, Chaldeans. He comes to this land. Now at this time, all of the evil people taken into slaves in captivity are scattered while the provinces owned by the Britons, the Chaldeans, once again. So, when you talk about the Babylonian captivity and my blood lineage, I have to connect Pedaiah to King Jaja. So I'm going to begin with Josiah. We're all pretty familiar with one of the youngest to ever be installed as king. Josiah falls to the Babylonians. Josiah falls to the Babylonians, and Eliakim, Josiah's son's name is changed to Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim falls, and you get a king or a father that is not appointed to the kingship, Shealtiel. Shealtiel has a son, Zerubbabel. I want to take this moment in this documentary of my history for you to all take a look at the behest and stealer. This stone artifact sits in Persia today. It shows King Darius as a great king taking the Israelites into captivity. I want you to look at and pay special attention to this last guy and what he's wearing, and the family photo of King Jaja. You notice anything similar? How about this little pointy hat? This sign of monarchy from the Israelites. So Ezra cataloged again the lineage, the families, and the peoples of Israel that come out at this time from Babel. Some stay behind. Those who come out are listed within the books of Ezra. And there is where you'll find the Bani people, the Igbos, listed by family and tribes once again. Well, Zerubbabel in the Igbo language is Ozorumbo. This is exactly what Britain is looking for. So when the Vatican hands over the 1815 mandate to Britain and its corresponding nations about its realm, they are pursuing and searching for this family inside Africa. And this is where they track down and targeted King Jaja. In this book, King Jaja, the Niger Delta, you will see right in the table of contents the victim. This shows that the British nation knew who they were tracking, because you see an extensive history throughout the first chapter leading to capture King Jaja. I'm going to read some excerpts from what the British have printed about King Jaja and his history. This is coming from them, and I'm going to interject some questions. King Jaja, Jubo Juboga, otherwise known as Obed Daya, from the clan that his father's name was Ozoruba. King Jaja is kidnapped 2 times. The first time at age 12. At age 12, he's kidnapped and made a bonding slave, according to their documentation, and begins dealings with the British. Who in Britain is JAJA dealing with? He proves himself with an aptitude for business, earning his way out of slavery. Who is JAJA proving himself to? This is a major question. He is enculturated, or is taught and learns Bani rituals. Who is the Bani people? And why does JAJA need to know and be enculturated into what this is? He is forced into Christianity. Remember the Concordat? 1801. JAJA is taking 1821. 6 years after the 1815 mandate. From the Vatican, Britain, and France, he becomes king or ruler and rebels against Britain. When you look at King JAJA's life, you have to ask yourself a few questions. And then remember, I gave you the unwritten rules of kingdoms. Kings taken captive.
The British are taking exacting pains to catalogue the people and tribes and families and locations of the Igbos. Who were they looking for? Royal descendants of the house of David and the priesthood were who they were looking for. The second time King JAJA is kidnapped, he's brought back to Buckingham Palace. Now, sovereign law in the UK states that the Queen cannot consort with commoners.
Now, the final stake in the coffin as to proving that the Babylonians are the Chaldeans, I want you to take a look at the cover of the book of Isaiah that I read from. You'll notice it says Chaldean paraphrase. The language it's written in is English. That's what we call it today in modern times. But if you scroll down the page, this Chaldean paraphrase is housed and issued to London. So JAJA has been with the Queen. When he was targeted, brought to England, and taught, again, by mandate of the Queen. Now the second time King JAJA was kidnapped, JAJA stays as a guest in Buckingham's house. After some argument and some disagreement, he's exiled to St. Vincent. From there, my family, we migrated to New York. And from New York, I escaped to live in Israel among my people, the Ishmaelites, Sheikh Aid. From the family of Abida, son of Abraham, where I met Bishop Owen and reconnected to my people, the Igbo, the Israelites, who were exiled. Now, when you're exiled, there's some things that need to be reconnected. I connected JAJA to Zerubbabel and the Ozarumba family. So let me give the lineage again with this full connection from the Chaldeans. Sheol Most High's elect. With Ezra under the kingdom of Darius in the Medo-Persian captivity. Then you have Hananiah of the house of Ozarumbo, Shechaniah of the house of Ozarumbo, and Shemaiah of the house of Ozarumbo, of Neriah of the house of Ozarumbo, of Elionai of the house of Ozarumbo, and Pedaiah in the house of Ozarumbo. In Ezra chapter 2, verse 10, the children of Bani, 642 that came out of the captivity. How exiles are done. Nebuchadnezzar in 2 Kings 24 and 15 exiled Jehoiakim to Babylon. So Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the Chaldean, takes Jehoiakim out from his land and brings him into a Babylonian province. He also exiled the queen mother, the king's wives, the officials, and the land's elite leaders from Jerusalem to Babylon. Same people, same tactics. In 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 1, Alexander was Philip's son, a Macedonian, one of the Western peoples, known as the Kittine, Rome. After Alexander became king of Greece, he defeated King Darius, who ruled over the Persians and the Medes. By doing so, Alexander greatly enlarged his realm. So you have the Babylonian captivity is taken over by the Assyrian captivity. Captivity is taken over by Alexander the Roman, which begins this Greco-Roman with Alexander being a Roman citizen. He still has Roman allegiance